failing to signal a lane change.
Riding in your girlfriend's car with a child in the back.
Running to the bathroom in your own apartment.
Selling cigarettes outside of a corner store.
Riding a commuter train.
Walking home with a friend.
Making eye contact.
Selling CDs outside of a supermarket.
Wearing a hoodie. Walking away from police.
Walking toward police.
Missing a front license plate.
Holding a fake gun in the park in Ohio.
Driving with a broken brake light. Sitting in your car before your bachelor party.
Walking up the stairwell of your apartment building.
Calling for help after an accident.
Holding a fake gun in Virginia.
On the way to Bible study.
Holding a fake gun in Walmart.
Laughing.
Holding a wallet.
For attending a birthday party. Doing absolutely nothing.
Not servile enough. Go to weareheremovement.com to tell President Obama and Congress that the time for change is now. We demand radical transformation to heal a long history of systemic racism so that all Americans have the equal right to live and to pursue happiness.
So how do we get here? To such a dark place. Sort of pit we can't seem to climb out from. Instead, we just climb upon one another and pull each other back down. Some may call it a lobster in a bucket syndrome. But how did we get here? How did our lives for generations fly before us? Out of our grasp, out of our control, as if our destiny was in the hands of someone else. It seems we have reached this dark place by design, by strategic measures, a hijacked culture, recreated and formatted for the New World Order. A broken people, but how did we get here? Some say, oh, slavery ended over 150 years ago and Jim Crow ended in 1965. Get over it. Well, the war on black people did not end in 1965. And we won't even add on the residual effects of the prior 400 years and generational destabilization and trauma. Instead, we'll focus on the perpetual downfall of a people from 1965 to our present day. This analysis will shed a bright light on how we got where we are at now and what methods were employed to guarantee this crippled position. Crippled mentally, physically, and spiritually, all by design. And no one is to blame. Let's get this clear. No one is to blame. No group, no other race. No one is to blame. Because we understand the Most High handles all matters, the good and the evil. And folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. And as Christ spoke from his very mouth, so the last will be the first, and the first will be the last.
It's you liberals who have lifted them up, Howard.
Paul, you conservatives make a mistake. You can't afford to strangle hope in people. Without hope, people become dangerous.
No, Howard. You liberals have let them invade our society. You give them jobs, political jobs.
Paul, you missed the point. It's only the smart ones we move up.
That makes it even worse.
No, we have to move them up. If we leave a smart one in the ghetto, he might develop into a leader against us. But if we raise him up into white society, we neutralize him. He feels compelled to try to act like us. He loses his identity and his racial anger, if he has it. He becomes alien to his brothers. They realize he sold them out and they grow to hate him. He becomes worthless to them and safe for us. No, thank you. In fact, in his love for the creature comforts, except for his color, he's become one of us.
Through the sciences, humanist research and development, psychology, eugenics, and social studies of the Fabian Society, Tavistock Institute, and the Esalen Institute, along with the assistance of the CIA, FBI, and foundations like Rockefeller, Mellon, and Carnegie, amongst others. Mind control and social engineering has been successfully applied to the deconstruction of the Black American population. Now, we understand these methods were used on all groups and populations in the nation, not just the Black. Yet extra measures were taken in particular on the Black race. And we are going to analyze those, analyze the methods by breaking down their administration according to decade, starting in the 60s, going into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and up into our current day and age. This cyclical and chronological understanding of mind control and its predatory nature will give you a much clearer sense of why the Black population is where it is today and why it functions as it does. Where are our leaders? Where are these celebs at when thousands of Black men are being killed in their own communities? Chicago, for instance. Why do they conveniently ignore the giant elephant in the room? Why don't you see these different artists and celebrities and basketball players and football players and athletes? Why don't you see them supporting any type of group in their own communities to fight the violence? Why don't you see these people in Chicago on the streets changing the environment? Why don't we see this? They're so quick to run to this Black Lives Matter organization protests and support all of these large government scale organizations, yet they can't support their small grassroots communities that need the most help. Why? Let's think about this, because this dichotomy sheds some serious light on what's really going on. See, these leaders, these celebrities, these activists, these intellectuals, these politicians, these entertainers, they're not who you think they are, because they have separated themselves from their community and joined a new one. They are gatekeepers for the elite structure now, and they have always been. They pretend to care for the Black population only when it is in the interests of the elite agenda, the program, the great work, the magnum opus. Shall we make more connections? Think about it. Are not all these so-called leaders and celebs fraternal and sisterhood members? Let's look at Oprah. Isn't she an Eastern Star?
One of the points it brings out is one of the mistakes that human beings make is believing that there is only one way to live. That we don't accept that there are diverse ways of being in the world, that there are millions of ways to be a human being. And many ways, many paths to what you call God.
That
and
is
her path
crazy.
might be something else, and when she gets there, she might call it the light. But her loving and her kindness and her generosity brings her, if it brings her to the same point that it brings you, it doesn't matter whether she called it God along the way or not.
And I guess the danger that could be in that, I mean, it sounds great on the onset, but if you really look at both sides, I
There
think
could possibly be just one way. What about Jesus? What about Jesus?
only one way. There is one way and only one way, and that is through Jesus.
There couldn't possibly be
Because you say there isn't.
There could possibly be.
Because you say, you intellectualize it and say there isn't. If you don't believe that, you're all buying into the lie.
Is not Cornel West, Jesse Jackson, LeBron James, and Drake puppets of the boule? Fraternal order slave scum? We can look at the history of black culture creation to recognize that these things have always been this way. The black elite, or talented 10th, if you want to go back to Du Bois, who was a boule member, a secret society, high black elite gatekeeper. The celeb class, whatever you wish to call them, they have always been used as a device to arrest the development of their own people, all for fame, security, and abundant wealth at the expense of others, and under the oaths of Satan and his elite families. These figures have been used to sell false dreams, false hope, and pigeonhole blackness within fixed categories, limited by labels and stereotypes, all by design, all in the purpose of division, divide, and control, and the development of the Aquarian Age, the great Atlanticist Republic of Plato, the Tower of Nimrod, the new Babylon under the same old mystery school religions, marked by nobility, the elite class, slaves, gatekeepers, and of course sacrifice. So how did we get here? Isn't it surprising that the black population has had exponential growth since the 1970s in a downward spiral? Residual culture decay that has been non-stop since about 1965. Prison rates have stayed on the rise. Murder rates have fluctuated but still begin to rise. Prison rates. Okay, that's the main thing we need to talk about here. Prison rates peaked in the 90s after a steady gradual growth from the 70s. And from the 90s at that peak, they continue to grow and fold over and roll over and just continue to spread. Why is this? How is this? How is this? Well, let's begin in the late 60s, where it all started. First off, we have to understand that there's a giant mind control program that we're all familiar with. This program was used on everybody, every race, all creeds. No one was safe from these things. But when you're the group that's at the bottom, and you're kept at the bottom, the effect is going to be much higher on these groups because they are much more vulnerable. And this has always been the position of the black population. So let's look into it. There's two main avenues we need to address: the arresting development and the culture identity creation. There was the heroin epidemic in the 70s. There was Vietnam, PTSD, and poverty. All these things struck the black population heavily. People came back from the war hooked on heroin, passing that on to their families, destroying the father and the mother and the child, all in one swift, single blow. The counterculture had a huge movement called free love. All right, this free love movement goes back to the 19th century, but that'll be another video. We can get deeper into where the free love movement came from. But it was created to separate state from matters around marriage, birth control, and adultery. So, in other words, this was a great way to popularize and establish a heathenistic and transgressive type of environment. So basically, birth control would be pushed, which is a part of eugenics. Adultery would be pushed, which is a sin to the father. And marriage was looked down upon and looked at as not necessary. Now, all this is part of the destruction of the family. So we understand what the free love movement really represented. This was one of the worst things for the black population, because the family was the only thing we ever had. And once these things were broken down by war, drugs, and poverty, it made development very, very difficult from this point forward. And this is included with government organized public housing in areas that were not conducive to anything positive. Okay, these things were places to arrest the development, not to promote development. So when the location is controlled and made to be lackluster and made to be counterproductive, on top of a social and cultural movement that's counterproductive, giving room for people to focus on sex and fun and drugs and being liberated and just worrying about nothing but enjoying life and loving others, you tend to forget what's important in life, like family, growth, and social development. Okay, all these things went out the window in the 60s. All right, and then there was the socialist movement, socialism, and revolutionary movements. Okay, which are all based in Fabianism. But blacks took a hold of this revolutionary movement because it fit their needs at the time. Okay, and it also plays on the emotion. All right, so we understand that a social revolution and rebellion in the New Left went hand in hand with the mind states of the black population at the time. Because we got to remember, in the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, the black population was a lot different. Okay, so where did the change come from? Well, the introduction to drugs and free love, so a loss of respect for family and relationships, and a new growing love for drugs and sex with random people, and expression and liberal beliefs. These kind of things became more important. Some hard hitters were the Summer of Love in '67, the Stonewall Gay Rights of '69, the French Socialist Uprising of '68, and the Black Nationalist peak of the Black Panther group in '66, and the peak in 1970. So we have to understand that all these movements, all these events directed the black culture in a certain way that led them away from development and more down a path of destruction, because it was leading them into a battle that could never be won. And not only that, it was a trick. It was a type of booby trap in a sense. All right, and this was all done through left movements based in Fabianism. Okay, ideas coming directly out of Tavistock. This is how they took down the French, the exact same way they did Russia. They create these socialist movements to have them be destroyed in their rebellion or revolutions. Revolutions never work. They never have. Protesting never works. It never has. These things have always been controlled opposition from the higher-ups, the elite, the real controllers of the society, the ones that own the banks, the ones that fund both sides of wars. Okay, revolution means nothing on this earth, and it never has. All right, the underclasses have always lost. And this is the design. This is Satan's world. This is the way it's going to be. But they have to make you believe that you can win. They have to make you believe that you can fight, when the only way to fight here is spiritually. Let's keep moving. So this is the 60s. This is where it directed us. All right, we were drugged up, sexed up, and misguided, zealous, moved by emotion, moved by anger, moved by socialist ideals and liberal ideals that took us away from what was really important, took us away from family, took us away from understanding of the Most High God. All right, pitting whites against blacks, when at the end of the day we all needed to come together under Christ. to beat the system. But that could never happen when you have this dichotomy of black and white and left and right. Okay? Hegelian dialectics have always been used and have always worked in destroying societies from the inside out. And this is exactly what we are experiencing right now. We are living 1964 to 1970 all over again, right now. Next was the 70s. This was the nail in the coffin. And that started with blaxploitation. Blaxploitation was the growth of the black culture creation. We went from heroin to cocaine, prostitution, pimp culture, consumerism, cars, clothes, and hoes. Okay, flash, gaudiness. Alright, this became part of the black culture, the black man and woman. The token black was created through blaxploitation.
I was once a young militant, okay? A young militant with a big old natural in ROTC. When I saw the Superfly album poster, and I heard the music. I got my natural fried, turned it into a perm, bought me a maxi coat, and shortly after that, I got me some baking soda, and I started sniffing it because I thought that was a cool thing to do. That was one album, one young man. I'm not telling you something that somebody told me. I'm telling you what happened to me. Okay? So if you have 25 years of thug, fuck, gangster, and nobody says it ain't cool, and we justify it, we turn the other way because it makes money for somebody. But in the meantime, there is a byproduct which is also making a lot of money, and that's the prison industrial complex.
Downtown LA at that time, the whole Broadway area with all the old theaters and everything, that was like a black Hollywood. It was like a black Westwood, all right? It was like all those big theaters up and down the street. Every film was a blaxploitation film. Every film was a black film. And they had, just like in Hollywood Boulevard, they didn't have like the marquee with the name with the letters. No, they had a big, the big thing there, a Hitman with a picture of, Bertie Casey on it, and, the Mac, and, picture of Max Julian on the marquee. I mean, it was like the old days.
It just meant that they found a way to tap into a black audience, and we exploit the dollars that they have by making movies for them, by them, that are about them. It didn't mean that they were exploiting our sensibilities or anything else. It was just trying to make a dollar.
My son Tupac was greatly influenced by the films of the 70s. He actually, by the time he died, had amassed a collection of all of those films. He watched them as a kid, and he watched them over and over again. What he watched as a kid was these films and Bruce Lee's films and all of the martial arts films, and that was his basic culture.
Also, the sexual movement was raging through the streets. Shorts were getting, skirts were getting shorter. Men's pants were getting tighter. People were throwing underwear and bra out the window, type of thing. We had Woodstock, You Love Your Body, Naked, Peace, and Love. So all of that was about who we were too. And you could see that in the film.
This was the shift from the self-sacrificing we generation of the civil rights movement and its aftermath, and the me consumer generation that was starting to rise. Energy that up until about 72, 73 was very militant starts to get displaced into sartorial display, fashion, coiffure. The afro was out. Guys that were wearing berets and black leather jackets suddenly started showing up with big gold chains with Coke spoons on them and crushed velvet with big floppy hats.
And isn't it interesting that the writers, well, some of the main writers, especially in the beginning, the most famous of the writers of these blaxploitation films were Ashkenazis, Cohen, for instance. We understand this was a design. This is culture creation. This is social engineering done through Hollywood. We can look at the works of Aldous Huxley and Plato himself, who both spoke about the importance of theater, the arts, and music, and how any type of mind control could be implemented through these concepts. Anything you would want a group to believe, or any way you would want a group to act, you can get them to believe or act any way through the arts, through music. And this is what they did with blaxploitation, and also implemented into soul music and funk music. Blacks were a lot different 30 years prior, but once these movements hit, the culture was shaped, and it became solidified and spread across the nation and the world. Soul, funk, disco era, all these things destroyed the development of the black culture. Sports stars blew up, basketball, football. Pipe dreams comes out of all of these things. Distractions, socially stagnant. And these things shaped a generation. Blaxploitation and the works of the 70s shaped a generation. And as we stated earlier, arresting development, culture, identity creation. This is all about the identity here. This is how the black culture was created, through blaxploitation. All right, which originated in blackface. We can look at blackface of way back. That was the start, but it really came into fruition during blaxploitation with the use of Hollywood and screens. And it goes further to and it just continued down to Spike Lee and John Singleton with Boys in the Hood, and the famous movie Colors, which started the gang rise and hip-hop movement that started decay of black culture through groups like NWA. Hollywood music, television created the black culture and culture in general, but we have to understand that black culture was used to bring in a whole lot of very distasteful and destructive ideals. And it was done through entertainment, as it always is. So where are these celebs? Where's Beyonce? Where's Chris Brown? Where's Drake? Kanye West, who's from Chicago? Cornel West. Well, where are all of these big black stars that are supposed to care about their communities? Seems like they care more about this government movement, Black Lives Matter, than they actually do about the black communities. All right. So from the 70s, we go right into the 80s, and what happened in the 80s. So we had the drug movements, the free love of the 60s, the blaxploitation of the 70s, and that led us right into the 80s crack era. This completely deconstructed the black population. These drugs were funneled into all urban areas and projects, and really took a toll on the group. Peaking in the mid-80s, this movement was weaponized, and it was in all urban areas. Right? Weaponized drugs, brought in, of course, through the CIA, FBI, which are controlled by the Skull and Bones movement, which is the largest, most powerful secret society in America, and contains the large drug families that have been controlling drugs since the East India Company of the 18th or the 19th century, being the Russell family and the Bushes who took over later. It's a Masonic organized crime, all right, the drug game, which also spawned the war on drugs in the 80s, and also the war on gangs. So the war on drugs and the war on gangs came out in the 80s. The war on drugs came out of the new rush of cocaine and crack that was being brought in by the U.S. government. So they bring in the drugs, and then they create the forces to take the drug users and dealers down. So it's all Hegelian, both sides. And the war on drugs started in 71 with Nixon, but it started to increase in the 80s under the Vice President George Bush, of course, of the Bush family, Skull and Bones drug czars of America. Makes complete sense when you really lay it all out on the table and see it. And this happened right before the epidemic of the mid-'80s. Perfect timing, okay? It's almost like it was planned. And this was all done not only to destroy a population and a culture and arrest the development of a generation of people once again. It was done to boost the prison industrial complex, right? Because we understand the prison industry is a huge corporation and industry, and it makes a lot of money, and it is a form of eugenics, it is a form of labor production, and it is a form of population control and social engineering. So all of these things tie in together, from the war on drugs, the war on gangs, and the prison industrial complex, and the military industrial complex. Military industrial complex gains support through the underprivileged black men that are held down in society and can't make it. So what do? They go to the military. So they become slaves and sacrifices in another part of the beast. So through the 70s and 80s, mainly in the 80s, we get the war on gangs. And when you do your research on the gangs, they all are Masonic. They are Masonic organizations. When we look at the main characters who started these gangs, they all came out of Masonic orders. In Chicago, it mainly came out of Nation of Islam groups, Black Power movements that all are Masonic. We can look at the Black Panther Party, which also was Masonic. We can look at Huey P. Newton, who was a fraternal order brother. So, when you really go back to it, you see this is all Masonic. This is all fraternal. All these groups, whether they feel a certain way about society or not, they all are under the same leader. And they all are denying the Most High. So it all seems to make sense when you really look at it. So gangs came out of Masonic and civil rights. Basically, it's Masonic and civil rights residue. So a lot of the civil rights groups, like the Black Stone Rangers, who ended up becoming the Black Peace Stones, which were a huge gang in Chicago, which became the People's Nation. And I mean, these gangs turned into huge sets of all kinds, but they all came out of the Black Power movement. So we see how the Black Power movement, which was destroyed and infiltrated by COINTELPRO and was always controlled from the beginning through fraternal orders and masonry, we see them morph into gangs, which become another way for black men to be killed and to kill each other. So you find all these people complaining about, blacks kill each other. Why if you think Black Lives Matter, why are blacks killing each other? Well, let's look at the history. Let's see the development. All right? Let's see how these things were created through culture creation, through design. There's nothing biological or natural about any of these movements. I mean, they've all been designed. And how? Well, promotion, advertisement. Gangs have always been advertised. See, once these gangs were created and became a big deal, they may have started through revolution, but they became popularized through what? Through music. Okay, through music and film. We have the film Colors. That really started a huge growth in the functions of gangs that peaked in 1991, and we in around 91, 92 we had Ice-T with the whole cop killer movement, which started a whole big thing, which was a product of Time Warner. And I mean, it's gosh, man, I'm gonna go a lot deeper into this stuff eventually, but I'm really just trying to put it out there to give a broad idea of how all of this came to be. The whole gangster mentality, the whole thug thing that has been just connected to the black man and the black culture, and the whole idea of how black women have been perceived also go along with these stereotypes that come out of black exploitation, that come out of black films, which were originally written by Ashkenazis and different types of elite groups, okay, that were never in the interest of blacks, though blacks didn't have much. So we went along with things, and little did we know they were not in our best interests, and they would end up being things that destroyed who we could actually eventually would become. So in the 80s, we have the crack, we have the gangs, the war on gangs, the war on drugs. All CIA created, military created and funded. This was all done to create and to boost the prison industrial complex as well as a military industrial complex. So in a sense, the black population has always been used as not only a guinea pig, but a pawn in a lot of bigger schemes. Okay. And moreover, this group always had to be controlled. It had to be socially engineered, and it had to be sacrificed in many ways. And that was done through the gangs, done through prisons, done through the crack era, and originating in blaxploitation to demoralize the group. Okay. And on top of that, another thing that happened in the 70s that I didn't touch on was the idea of materialism, consumerism. All right, cars, clothes, and fashion. These things became popularized and became part of the black culture. I mean, before this blaxploitation, blacks weren't really into all of that. So you hear studies now saying the black population is the biggest consumer in the nation. And all of this consumerism and superficial kind of showy, flashy mentality that blacks have tended to develop come out of the blaxploitation era. Okay, the morals and the important ideals to the black people were tainted through blaxploitation. Okay, and the minds and spirits of the black population was destroyed even more through the crack era. Okay, destruction of families, putting the fathers in jail, putting the mothers under pressure, which would in turn hurt the children's development. It's just like a domino effect. Okay, and so yeah, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s really took a toll, and it led right into the 90s, okay, which just continued the decay, because what came in the 90s? Hip-hop really started, well, hip-hop started in the late 70s, but it didn't really start to really blow up into the late 80s and into the 90s, where once NWA came out, which also was an Ashkenazi creation and CIA funded and operated movement. NWA and the whole thug criminal programming just literally destroyed any form of development that was still left was destroyed by this group, and the prison industrial complex and eugenics and family destruction just really came in and kicked down the door, and it's pretty much been over since then, because it's just been an absolute downward spiral ever since, and then in 2000s, you know, it just kind of went back to the Flash. It was almost like a disco era, a new disco era came back in the 2000s, and now we got this just freak show in terms of hip-hop today. So it's, you know, when you look at the development from the 60s till now in terms of the black culture, you see how it's just been deteriorated decade by decade, and it's pretty disgusting. And it's and when I see these celebrities get up here and talk about they want to make change, and I look at what they're part of, who they work for, what do they bring to the table, and I realize they're just part of all of these movements that have started in the 60s. They're under the same groups, they're part of the same fraternal orders, and it really infuriates you when you really think about it, when you think about how all of this has developed, and you look at the black culture now and you see the predicament that they're in and where things are at, and when you understand the history and the development of it, it makes complete sense how this culture has been hijacked, literally hijacked, and developed strategically, designed scientifically, all right, with methods that have been documented since the 30s and prior, since the late 1800s. Okay, I talk about them all the time, Bernays and Freud and Aldous Huxley and Thomas Huxley and all these eugenicists and these behaviorists and social engineering scientists. See, they understood that the black population, once freed, were going to be a factor. There's a large population of us. This group needed to be controlled. This group needed to be downsized, and it needed to be halted. And they did this through social engineering techniques using music and entertainment. Okay? So this is why black people are where they're at, by design. And again, there's no one to blame for this stuff. This is all prophecy. We get it. We understand that. There's no one to blame because the Most High is running the show. This is Satan's world. We get that. The main thing is we have to get things right. We have to join our brothers and sisters of all colors and creeds under the Most High through Christ. All right, righteousness, faith, the holy word. Okay, these are the only things that are going to straighten us out, because we forgot about these things through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We put these things to the side. Our spirits and souls have been corrupted. And I'm talking about everybody, not just blacks. We've all been corrupted through this satanic system of social engineering, mind control. All right, so you see all your favorite actors, your favorite singers and sport athletes, they're all in it to destroy you. And for those out there, hey, I might be preaching to the choir. I understand that, but I'm reestablishing these things. This stuff just gets to me sometimes, man, you know. It's hard to accept it. It's hard to just look at it and understand it and just let it be. Where are the leaders? Where's Will Smith? All right, this big black actor. What does he do for anyone? You see, and a lot of these people, they give money to different foundations. Look at the foundations. Look at who owns those foundations. They're usually just putting money right back into the pockets of the elite. A lot of these foundations are just hoaxes, man. Why aren't they going into the communities? Why aren't they going to direct families? Because that's where it all begins. It begins in the family. And that's why they're trying to destroy the family. Okay, look at his son, Jaden Smith. This kid is promoting like glamour magazines and gendered fluidity. Okay, he's more concerned with ridiculous concepts than the life and death of people in this nation. And we're not even talking about the global issues. There's kids, people, women, children dying all over the world right now. You know, so it's really overwhelming when you take everything into account, but you got to start somewhere, right? You got to start somewhere. Where's Stephen Curry? All right, this guy's, you know, on every front page of everything right now. What is he doing? What is he coming out and putting forward? You got all these celebrities and athletes talking about their opinions and how they're affected by these things, but what does that mean? Judge a man by its fruits. I don't see any good fruits coming from anyone. You know, talk is cheap. Okay, and that's all they're supposed to do because they're gatekeepers. They're not supposed to do anything. They're not supposed to help anyone. They just make sure everyone stays calm and stays in the same position. And they play on emotion. They play on pride. They distract you with entertainment and comedy to keep you in the same place. You know, they got these celebrities, 23 ways you can be killed by a cop. It's just ridiculous. There's one way you can be killed, and that's in your own neighborhood by your own people. Why aren't they discussing these things? Why aren't they going into these neighborhoods and doing something? Using their money, starting organizations that help their own people or others in need. Why aren't they doing these things? Because they don't want to. And they're not allowed, honestly. They're not allowed because social engineering requires the lower underclass to stay where they're at. That's part of social engineering. That's why revolution will never work. That's why none of this stuff will ever work, because this is part of the hierarchy. This is the pyramid scheme that we live in. It is a requirement that there be a large group of oppressed people. And blacks happen to sit in that area. And that is prophecy. That is the way it is on this earth. And there's nothing no one is going to do about it. This is in the hands of the Most High God. Okay. What about Michael Jordan? Everyone's buying his shoes. This guy's he makes more money off the black population than anyone. Okay, and he's involved in private prison investment in the Blackstone Group. Okay, that's where his money is invested. In the prison industrial complex that's promoted through hip-hop music and gangster rap and thug films and thug culture in general, which came directly out of what? The hip-hop industry, the music industry, Hollywood. These things have been created, the way people dress, the way they talk, the way they look. You know, there was a time when no one acted these ways. We've learned these acts. We've learned these behaviors. There's nothing natural, organic about them. There's no way to be black. These things have been learned.
But I am somebody.
Idols and mentors. Where are they at? What are they doing? Nothing. African American. The term is ridiculous. It was created by Jesse Jackson in the 90s. And we understand Jesse Jackson is part of the boule, gatekeeping, sellout, scum. Him and Al Sharpton, both of them, all these guys.